So in many cases, what I would suggest is you're going directly to your ultimate account, whether it's on premise, off premise, whatever it may be. But if you go to the distributor and say, I have business that is here and it's ready for you, it always puts you in a much better position.
Hey guys, thanks for joining in the call. The whole idea of this call is really on how to pitch to the US wine buyers, which includes sommeliers, retailers, and we have a master of wine here as well, Bob. This is really a questions curated from the brand owners and the suppliers. Many people are joining around from the world. So I've just taken exact questions and pasted it for you guys out here. So this will be more of a Q&A session, and then at the end, I've added, the couple of golden questions, which is like how to make an effective pitch to you all. Hi, Bob, I can see you now. On how, to form a sales process to make introductions, and how to create an effective pitch to open doors and to sort of get appointments and so on, right? So let's just dive right into this call. Cool. So at this point, once again, I want to thank you all for joining in. For all our buyers here, once again, thank you for taking the time out, and all the attendees. Appreciate you joining in. So let's go right into the questions. The first question, is what is the best way to approach a distributor that you are interested in working with, right? So let's say if you are a retailer or a sommelier, and then you want to use you as a bait and then go back to the distributor to work with. So how does that approach look like, and what is the best way to do that?
Just a quick bit on who I am. I've been in the wine trade for more than 40 years, so I'm an old guy. I've primarily worked on the retail side. I've been a buyer for about 4 decades. I'm currently linked to an import company, which I own with a couple of other partners. But I'm very active within the US market, and I do a fair amount of business in international markets as well. I've lived overseas and been connected to a number of other projects. But in terms of approaching a US
and I think, Bob, you missed the main point. You were the buyer of one of the biggest chains, and you've done a lot of buying. You've done $1 million of buying, Sam's Club to Coles in Australia, right? So you had a buyer's hat for biggest chains of the world.
Yeah, so I've been connected to many large chains. I was an independent retailer for a number of years. I've worked in the club channel, the grocery channel, specialty, independent, .com. I mean, the whole range. So these things happen when you're an old man. So that's me. The bit in terms of approaching distributors in the US, I just give a quick overview of what's happening there today. It's a tough market for many players today. And at the distribution level, if you're connected to any of the big players out there, you may have heard stories that people are being laid off and there's some changes happening, and there's some struggles out there because there's some contraction going on. So my thought in terms of if you have a brand, something that you're looking to launch, and you have a distributor that's targeted, for starters, you have to have a reason for being. I mean, the fact is there are more brands out in the marketplace than what the market actually needs. You need to have some sort of proposition on who you are, an identity. Oftentimes, trying to be all things to all people is not a good play. If you're in the wine trade, it's an extremely fragmented business. And I think sometimes that can be a frustration and lend to some difficulties, but it also provides a good amount of opportunities as well. So also understand that the role of a distributor has really changed significantly in recent years. Some years back, they were very much brand builders. That's really not the case anymore today. So really, they're the mandated link between you and your customer in many cases. You essentially are the brand builder. So creating that identity for who you are, many times especially with smaller brands, It's all about creating an emotive link, something that creates an identity that is unique to you and your specific target audience. Having that information definitely at hand is always positive. Now, in terms of connecting with distributors, oftentimes, even when you're a new brand, the distributor is going to want you to have some sort of account presence. So in many cases, what I would suggest is you're going directly to your ultimate account, whether it's on premise, off premise, whatever it may be. But if you go to the distributor and say, I have business that is here and it's ready for you, it always puts you in a much better position. Also understand the cost model that distributors are playing with. They're always going to have their hand in your pocket, and they're always going to be looking for sample allowances and incentive dollars, and there's going to be promotional funds attached to your brands in most cases, and that'll vary by state. It may be a post off, a scan, some sort of volume discount, whatever is legal in your state that you've targeted is going to come into play, and that will be something that you're expected to fund. So building that pricing model in a way where you have the latitude to pull levers that are going to drive boxes is going to be a critical piece.
Michael, for you from Anseria Vineyards, as a winery from, called Chagua Valley, known for producing high quality wines due to their unique climate and terroir, what key aspects do you consider when selecting new wines for the US market? Additionally, how can we stand out to meet your specific expectations and needs? So you can break that down into two. One is if obviously someone's pitching the terror and the climate and the character of that region, how they can approach you, and one is just a standard question of any different things that wineries can do today.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I've been a sommelier for probably the past 10 years or so in San Francisco Bay Area, and that really is the market I know very well. And so my expertise is really speaking of California, what Californians drink, and the sectors that I'm essentially in, which also means that there are many categories that just don't resonate at all with either where I do business, specifically the cities around me, or the tier of what business I'm in. Meaning, there's retail, there's different outlets. I'm in fine dining, and so there definitely is a certain cap of type of wines that we don't even look at. Respectively, so I would say, this is a tricky one, but I actually really like this question because, the key aspects would be for wine to one, it should taste really good. It should really represent the grape, and it should have a great price associated with it. So even if all of those things are met, which you can probably think of examples in many areas of the world, it could still be hard to sell those wines in specific markets like myself. The Bay Area is greatly exposed to the wines of Napa, Bordeaux, Burgundy, Champagne, and even Italy remains very strong as far as categorically. And those have become my expertise of wines as I grew in the market I'm in. And as much as I learn and go to seminars and learn about new things, I find that it's very hard for a lot of brands, like Coachella Valley, for example. I find that even most Southern, like hemisphere, South American wines in general, although I've found even specifically with Chilean wines that in the past 15 years, the quality of those wines is amazing. Like they have an older history, but the wines have really come pretty far. But I have to tell you that still really hasn't made a dent in my market at all. Unfortunately, there are many examples of your counterparts and your wines that are in the market, but I really think they're taking up an extremely small amount of the market and nearly less than 1% of what my wine list is. And so that's the hard task there, right? I have a wine list that has 3,500 wines on them. That's a lot, great wine list. I don't even know if I have one wine that may even be from like Chile, for example. So that's like, why is that? You have to understand that certain places have identities, and example of mine is to really just focus on Burgundy, Champagne, Bordeaux, Italy, and there's some other things sprinkled in. But there are so many things that we specifically, a restaurant with what I don't want to say we have a personality, but we don't bother to look at other things. People often come to us, not too often, but they say, "Why don't you have Paso Robles wines in here?" Those are pretty local, right? To me, we really don't. That's just the personality of the buyer and the brand of the restaurant I work in. Is, we're not snobby in that sense. It's just we have a focus.
So, Michael,
certain areas.
let's say you are one example of a restaurant, and obviously we all understand every restaurant has a different set of buying requirements. So maybe you can think of this as a generic question for all the restaurants. If you were from this particular region, what, as a buyer, if you were stocking 4 Chilean wines, for example, what kind of things you would look for before saying a yes to that wine?
Like, one, you got to have a great distributor, a great portfolio that is surrounded with things that are like yours. So you are going to accounts that are familiar and will ultimately buy your things. And it's really hard to get into the sector with just one brand. You almost need a region together to kind of come up in the ranks to eventually highlight one person. Does that make sense? Like, it's really hard to have a cult wine, and cult wines can really help push a whole region and a whole sector. I like, for example, in Spain, I really love, there's a few producers, but like Commando G, for example, these are, this kind of like this new winery that has these old vine grenaches, and they're now very limited and allocated. And it's kind of cool if you get to try them, and you can find them periodically. But it's hard to kind of tap into a market. You almost need a band of brothers behind you, and a bunch of, so it's almost like you need your whole region to like sparsely populate a sector. And sure, that kind of goes up and down, and it kind of might drown out a little bit, but that's the really main way to get recognition and to stand out and to kind of get into somewhere. Because I think this region has been pushing probably in our market for a long time, and probably in the US in general, but there's kind of a cap for certain categories and market share, I would say.
Makes sense. So maybe Paul, if you can help with this, it's just she was there, but again, some technical thing. How are Lebanese wines perceived? Are they considered premium or regular wines? Do you see interest in this category?
I'm not super familiar with Lebanese wine, actually. So they have like the flagship winery, I should say Chateau Mussar. Everybody knows about it because they produce great wines. They have a whole library, and they have a lot of old vintages. So I think people are very focused on this one right now. I'm sure it's underrated, and we have a lot of winery we don't know, or they are not representing California, or maybe generally in US. I'm sure they have like kind of interest for that, because that's from Middle East. It's like one of the nestle of the wine. So I'm sure they have potential for Lebanese wine.
Okay, maybe Bob, you have anything to add here? What are your perceptions on how they're perceived in a U.S. market?
Largely an unknown. It's an interesting thing, because you see, at least my take on it is, if you look at what's happened in the market over the last several years, and for me, I've always used the UK as a reference point. If something seems to be catching on in the UK, oftentimes it'll have a presence here in the US within a couple of years. If you go to some of the trade shows in the UK, you do see a good presence of Lebanese wine. But I think it really ties back to, people are looking for things that have a sense of place, a little different. There's a story behind it. It checks all of those boxes, but there are obstacles in that it's largely an unknown. So I think the audience is there, but it's probably fairly limited in scope.
One more question for you, Paul. Here is Belgian wine of interest. Pretty much the same question, from Belgian wine producer. Is that of an interest? How should I proceed to get acquainted with a wine importer? Again, very boutique niche or this category. How can they pitch to an importer, or what's your thing on this?
So yeah, I was really surprised when you brought that up, sir. It's like Belgium wine. It's probably like 99% of the people doesn't know about it, included me. So I'm from Champagne, so I had a chance to try a couple of times the one for Belgium because we are not too far. I think it's a new country for wine, it's a new region for wine. I think they're trying to grow because they just starting to create it. I mean, not starting, because already 20 years ago, they created the first AOC in 2004. So for the moment, it's very niche, it's very small, but I'm sure the US market is ready for that because the wine industry in US is very open and very looking forward to try the new wine, new country. So that's definitely something for US. Once again, it's going to be niche. It's going to be for specific person and specific restaurant or wine bar, etc. But they have a room for that for sure.
I think a quick answer from all of you on this, like I personally am seeing a lot of interest in less and unknown. Everyone wants to go to a place where not many people are going, right? These days, especially in UK, what you said, Bob, I'm seeing the trends of very unique places, right? So are you seeing consumer behavior more adventurous in wine, trying things, asking sommeliers, okay, let me go explore this?
I think if you have the approach and you bring a good wine, the customers have like kind of the trust with like their wine shop or the sommelier. So I think if you have a good approach and you explain the wine, if you have a story to tell behind, I think it's going to be easy to sell this kind of wine.
To Michael, I would like to ask about some effective ways to promote quite expensive limited production.
Amarone, yeah.
Amarone, that is not currently in the US market. So it's not currently in the US market, very limited production, expensive. What would be the best approach?
This is also like a category that has high quality and has a history where people do essentially recognize it. But again, I think this is a very limited category, meaning I easily have this category on my list, but do I need 10, like if I have thousands of wines on my list, for example, and I have Amarone, do I need more than 2 producers of Amarone on my list? Is 2 enough? And so Amarone can be sprinkled around the nation. So you might find yourself in areas that others are not. And the Amarone I deal with is from probably the most cult-like producer from the region, which is Quintarelli, which gets imported by Kermit Lynch. And what Kermit Lynch has done for all his importers since the 70s and 80s is he really has built those relationships. And like what Bob was saying, is there used to be more of a brand building occurrence. I think if you tap into portfolio or importing now, that's definitely to the scope, or it could be more limited to who you do business with. But to get back to the question, if you want to do a parallel of this type of wine with other wines that people might like, and then again, it would take a lot of kind of personal education and power and people to kind of transform people into drinking these types of wines. Example, if you find people who like sweeter reds or big, or they're missing the old style of Zinfandel that used to be really big, then you can kind of do a lateral and say, hey, this is where we can fit these limited production Amarones into these producers. Again, that's taking marketing. That's taking not a lot of money, but that does take money for reps to go around and for education for the brands and inside the distribution to kind of wrap their heads around and saying, this is how we're going to pitch this to certain areas. Again, if I want to kind of tag this question onto some other questions we already asked, this is not necessarily a niche wine, but it certainly can be. I think less niche than like Lebanese wines and Belgian wines, but all of these wines, or a single producer really, they can make kind of a mark if they have a good connection of a story. And that's very hard to do. And what I mean is like Ted Lemon from Literai, he makes a wine in New Zealand. So all of a sudden, like, that New Zealand wine pops up. It's super limited, but then, that's easily how you can sell it on the floor, or you have Jean-Marc Rouleau making a wine in Patagonia, and that's a super limited wine. But the only and it categorically on my list, it's something that would never sell, but it could be because I can easily point it out and say, oh, you like this. I have this interesting product. So there always is a way to get these here, but you really kind of have to convince the buyer and the sommelier, and you have to do a lot of tasting and going around. So it's tricky.
Bob, obviously a macro and big question, but if you can sum it up with us in bullet points or even the key factors. So what are the key success factors for entering and exporting to the US market? But pretty much, this is a question from an overseas brand. What do they consider before they are, entering the US market?
Yeah, this is really a quite complex question. Look, the US market, really think of 50 states as 50 countries for one. Entering the US as a new brand, there's a lot of challenges with this. Again, this was touched upon a bit in some of the other conversation, but certainly being trend correct in terms of what's being imported is a critical piece. There's some contraction going on in the business right now. So, it in some cases, I think is going to be quite challenging to find an opportunity. And you also have the exchange rates oftentimes working against you as well. I mean, the US dollar is very strong at the present time. But my thought would be to enter the US market, you're partnering with someone, an import company that's going to represent you. Your due diligence in terms of selecting someone who can do the job that you're looking for. So what I would suggest is maybe contact some other clients they're working with, get some gauge of the level of satisfaction there. A very basic piece, but oftentimes something that's not discussed. I would do a little due diligence in terms of, do they pay their bills? Because again, this can be a challenge. I think there are a lot of opportunities out in the marketplace today, but they're niche opportunities, and it's about finding the right wines in the right places, the right price points. For instance, I don't think the world needs another $10 Chardonnay or Cabernet from really most anywhere in the world. But there is a growing interest in what I'm going to call alternative grape varieties. And this all ties back to a place where you have a story, there's something unique. And if you can create an emotive link, and not trying to be all things to all people, but if you have a target audience and your message resonates with them, in many cases, you're gold. So it's that homework and finding, the fit that makes sense based on your specific situation.
I think also, you said it very right, like have to be trend correct. So are there any, I'll divert this question to everyone. What are some trends, like let's say 3 or 4 categories or consumption patterns that you all are seeing? And everyone can answer this in turn, like 3 or 4 countries or varietals or sub-regions that you see are moving upwards and you are buying more, or, you are seeing growth in.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to go back to alternative grape varieties. Okay. I think this is really an interesting story. And, maybe it could be termed indigenous grape varieties, but I think it goes a bit beyond that. And one example, for instance, a couple of examples, actually. If you take something like Fiano or Pecorino in Italy, you go back several years ago, these were grape varieties that really had no presence whatsoever. They've increasingly become relevant. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. With both of those examples, they're really suited very well to climate change. A couple of white grape varieties, they can get very, very ripe. The acid doesn't fall. I mean, it fits a lot of what the challenges are in many places. Mm-hmm. Now you're starting to see that grape variety pop up in places like Australia, for instance. The wines are outstanding. I mean, I think these are really interesting because they're different. They fit the times, And the wines have a lot of character, a lot of class. There's a good story behind it. So for me, it's all about alternative grape varieties. I think that's really the future. It's not that one grape variety is going to take off and be the next big thing. In my view, it's this collection of these alternative varieties as a group that becomes more relevant.
Michael?
I love this question, and it can go in a few different ways. I've like Bob's right, different grape varieties, and then as we go on, we see grape varieties that are going to be kind of planted more, pushed more, and even accepted into law more into different regions because of their climate endurance. But other than that, I would say I have a lot of people, again, not a lot, but I do have repeat questions around non-alcoholic beverage. Sure, there's actually, I've explored a number of beers that are NA, but we're talking about wine. And I'm starting to see these kind of non-alcoholic wines kind of pop up. I currently do not have any on my list, but there's some made internationally and locally, some that are not good at all. And then there are a few that are compelling. But again, this is an interesting category because it just fills a void, or it's a section of wine, but it doesn't really speak of terroir, if that makes sense. So that's a category. And a lot of the categories that we talk about that either can grow or not grow, we ultimately as buyers want to have a product that speaks of the grape, of the land. It has character, it has a story. So now I just mentioned a category, NA wine, which really could maybe be leading, like a brand can lead by their story and a good quality taste. But, you know, the question of like, is there terroir in this NA wine is a little, I don't know, it's a little weird. I would say as things get warmer and warmer, I'm really excited to see just the adaptation. So for example, Champagne is getting drier and drier, and you'll see that in the New World. You should really push towards extra brut or drier or brut nature if you're making if you're coming from like, you know, New World grapes. You'll even see this in Champagne. Like the warmest sites, even in Champagne, they tend to make those tend to be why those bottlings are brut nature, for example, because there's so much ripeness already that the perceivability of sweetness is even greater. That's a different question. Then there is a category that I would like to see to grow. And this is also within the Champagne category. There is a category known as Coteaux Champenois. These are the still wines from Champagne, and they're very limited. I really don't see that many examples, but every time I do, it's really interesting to find mostly Pinot Noir. In the rare cases, you'll find still Chardonnay from Champagne. But I think as the climates are changing, we might see more of that category in a very small way kind of pop up. Coteaux Champenois, so the still wines of Champagne. In decline, I really see kind of some of the Bordeaux auxiliaries in decline. I think Cabernet Franc, Melback had like a great marketing and it had its heyday, and people still periodically ask for that. But I do see the decline of that already happening. I see orange wine declining. Thank goodness. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely room for a lot of things. And I think other grape varieties. I think what Bob was saying, native grape varieties that people aren't necessarily too familiar with are compelling, could work, but it's not going to work out for everybody.
Paul, what's your take on, you know, what's growing in the US market and a couple of declines that you see?
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page as Bob and Michael. I think the new grape variety, and I should have had the new wine region. Like I think probably in the next 10 years, Belgian wine is going to be maybe more important than it is today. I know we're starting to make wine in France, in Brittany, and never be a wine region before. So that's completely new. And I think the climate change and the wine world just evolved very, very fast the past few years. So I think I have a lot of things going on right now, especially with the new grape, the climate change, and the new technique for making the wine better. So that's probably is going to be that's growing in the future. The people that don't want like a big production where we used to have in the past, I mean, You could look at Chianti or Bordeaux like 30 years ago. That wasn't very good, but it was produced massively. So I think they started to be more reasonable, I should say, and not just like too much wine as they used to in the past.
Cool. So Bob, which of the following segments represents a bigger opportunity in your opinion? Low and no alcohol or natural wines at this moment?
So I think this is a bit of an overlap with some of my other comments. Again, this depends on who you are. If you're representing a wine that is tied to some sort of provenance, your options here are going to be limited. If you have the capability to be free in terms of creating a brand based on what the market demand is, okay, maybe low or no alcohol could be a possibility. The natural piece I find interesting because oftentimes this seems to be very poorly defined. And if natural wine is, with your definition or a person's definition, if that really constitutes a wine that's produced through minimal manipulation, think of pet nat, for instance. Generally, I'm not much of a fan of pet nat, but maybe I'm not the target audience. But I think something like that, it has a very active, interested market, but it's a tiny segment. And I think the growth potential there is probably limited. And then there's all sorts of problems with this as you get through the distribution chain as well, because something like pet nat, for instance, changes. You taste it today, taste it 3 months, 6 months down the road. I mean, the wine is constantly like a moving target. To me, that is not something that has success written all over it for a broad audience. But if your definition of natural ties back more to the means in which the wine is produced, getting back to a vineyard, if you're talking more eco-friendly practices, for instance, whether it's sustainable, organic, biodynamic, regenerative is really become a big hot topic now. If that is part of your broader definition of natural, I think that's something that is almost going to be a necessity going forward. You look at areas like in Paso Robles, for instance, you have a fair number of producers there that are going down that eco-friendly path, but now it's almost a necessity because of the drag on natural resources, water, for instance. It's become almost a requirement. So my feeling is between the two of these, if these are the two options, if you have a brand that's built on provenance, it has to be the natural path. But my definition of the natural really would entail more of that eco-friendly aspect versus the minimal manipulation in the winery. I'm kind of dancing around. I'm giving you a politician's answer on this.
Paul, sorry, Bob. So great answer. I just want to ask you in a different way as well. Where is more consumer awareness in the US, right? So when, what are they, where do you see more demand in between these two from the end consumer today?
So my feeling on this, and this is just my gut feeling, if it's more broad market retail, if you're going into a grocery store or something that's a mass market, I think low or no alcohol probably has broader appeal. It's easy to understand. It's easy to convey the message. If it's a more savvy consumer, someone a little more experienced, someone who maybe spends a bit more time delving into what the various aspects of a wine means, then I think probably natural is more of an appeal. So I think for me, it really depends on what is your target audience.
Agreed, but I think that's what maybe they want to know. Maybe if you're launching today, what would you launch? But we got the answer. Understood. I think Dejah is on the call as well. So let me ask Dejah this question. How can we stand out to meet your specific expectations and needs? If you are pitching to a sommelier, I think this will be a good answer from you, Dejah. If what kind of expectations do you have as a sommelier buyer, from a supplier, and what are your needs that they can help you and start a relationship with, in scratching your needs?
I feel that when you are kind of on the floor selling wine in a restaurant setting, sometimes you have to, sort of gauge what your customer is, what their dining is going to be like, what their extended time they're going to be there for. Some things take a little bit of time to open up, so you don't really want to introduce them to something that's just not quite ready yet. The expectation won't be, as spectacular, because sometimes things need to be decanted for a longer time, and if you had that time in advance of knowing, it would be a better experience for them. Okay, so when a supplier is approaching me, I would absolutely want them to have some sort of knowledge of what space they're trying to sell to. I find that a lot of times, because I've been on the other side of being in sales too, I kind of did my homework and made sure I wasn't introducing the buyer to something that they probably didn't even need. There wasn't a niche for it there. It just wasn't the right space for it. Or maybe they also didn't realize that they needed it, but I also did my homework, did my footwork, looked around. And so that's really important, because you don't want to go into a place blindly, just expecting, someone to, spend their time to taste with you or to meet with you when, they don't have time for it, so you have to really bring them in. You have to give them something that is worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Also too, I'm mostly talking from the retail side because that's where I am now. But, if your packaging, your bottles are just, super annoying to handle and deal with, I mean, that is a problem. It doesn't matter what is in that bottle. I mean, if it's just something that is just, a nuisance to deal
Mm-hmm.
with, that's also something too. But the bottle being a little bit too odd shaped or too tall for the shelves, the packaging just a little bit too much, sometimes subtlety is better than something that just pops out,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the most important things, bottle shapes, length, size, and even, the varietal that the bottle is supposed to be in. Everyone has this vision of what the bottle shape should be for its specific type of grape. And then you're putting this grape in a different type of bottle. It kind of throws everyone off,
True. Like a Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand would be in a particular bottle people expect, right?
Yeah. I mean, even without the label, take the label off, you have the bottle and you sit it in front of you, like, okay, I can probably say that this is what this is supposed to be, but it's a different bottle, it's a different wine, and so that's also too. And if you are going to do something like that, then it better have some points. It should be, well accepted from maybe Michelin starred restaurants. There's a lot that you're kind of, doing if you if you're going down that path and trying to be different,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes being traditional is just fine, it's perfect.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the things, I mean, I would add here as well as a good tip is I normally, when I did my wines, I normally just saw the number 1 or number 2 and their packaging type. So if the Yellowtail Shiraz $7.99 for that category was this way, this package, you just pretty much stick to that, right? So it's because consumers are so used to that market leader, that way you avoid that friction of completely coming up with different things. What's your take on the people putting wines in 6 packs and white boxes? Is it a no? When you see a 6-pack versus 12-pack or a white case versus a branded case, does it even affect in the buying decision?
Okay, so again, coming from the retail side, I mean, I've worked in restaurants too, but now I'm fully in retail. So, all right, so if the wine is coming in 6 packs, and it's at a certain price point, then, those go into a specific area within the shop. But if they're 6 packs and they're inexpensive wines and the bottle is weighty, like the glass is just heavy. To me, it is such a waste. And I kind of take it personal a bit, because I'm just like, we're wasting, packaging, we're wasting glass, we're wasting boxes. I can't stack this. This doesn't make any sense.
What are your tips to cold call, an account? Can be a retail, can be a restaurant, but in your case, Bob, you can explain a chain buyer or a retail, what is a good cold call tip and a sales process to approach the buyer?
Well, in this, what I would suggest is the cold call. I would set something up in advance. I mean, showing up and just, you have a bag of wine, or you've got some sort of pitch to make. Oftentimes, that's not a recipe for success. But some sort of plan before, a week before, reach out. This is who I am. You send maybe a little cover information on what you represent, pricing, availability, a little bit of the story. If you can link something to this term I use, an emotive link of, here's the hook, here's what makes us unique, different, here's, creates our identity. I think these are all, good ways to connect. Now, I think in many cases, if you're reaching out to a buyer that is part of a small chain or just an independent, oftentimes it'll be easier to contact an individual like that and get an appointment. But I think it was mentioned earlier by someone about being respectful for the time, but make sure you do your due diligence before. If you're calling on an account, my suggestion is visit that account before you actually make the sales call. So you're familiar with what they're doing, what maybe if it's a shop, what type of items do they focus on, what types of price points, are they maybe focusing on things that are a little more trendy and out there, are they more traditional, whatever it may be. But it gives you a little bit of line of sight in terms of where are they most likely to have an interest. The other piece that is critical is, if you're a buyer, in most every case, you're going to have some sort of financial responsibility and numbers to hit. And having items that have some sort of strong margin, maybe they may be an account that values having exclusives. So this is something that we can sell, get behind, and we don't have to worry about that business going somewhere else, because we have an exclusive. It all comes down to really doing the due diligence on the account. And I can't overstress how important it is that you actually physically go there and experience what is it that this business is all about.
Michael, same question, as a last final question on your tips on approaching the buyer, cold calling tips, and, what kind of things you want them to, do.
Yeah, this is a great question, actually. Someone on the other side, you have to be very smart and you have to actually put some work in to get a result. From retailers to restaurants of all types, you're not gonna, probably most times you're not gonna really find their wine list available online, and some top tier places have that stuff updated all the time. Some smart retailers have their inventory linked to their websites. You might actually have to go to a lot of accounts and kind of look at what they're doing. But once you figure that out, what I'm getting towards is to do smart targeting. You have to potentially look at a wine list, for example, or look at a business and look at what they have, and then look and see what they're missing. So you could say, I see you are pretty low in this category and I have a product that can slip in there. That's what I mean by it's going to take a little bit of work to go to that retail shop and say, I noticed you only have 2 Chilean wines, but this is the third one you really need to have. So that's, that's not just a cold call, that you actually have to put in some time and find the businesses you want to be in for some of these small things. And that is good reasoning, is to say, I've looked at your program and I think you could really use this product. And again, the respectful part is great. The hours of operation, not during service for restaurants, follow-ups. I mean, it's also very key to not be so annoying. And it's really hard for people. Some people are tapped out on all their buying power and they don't really need any new categories or any new SKUs. But and you got to understand for some restaurants, there's slow periods during the summer and there's like busy periods towards the caps of the year and around the year. So the potential buying might change throughout the year. So to constantly follow up without being annoying and being professional is definitely something.
So I just want to add one more thing as well. So Paul, you can have some examples. So let's give them some example of what is a good way to actually cold call, right? So I'll give you one as a starting. So I would come, I would drop a business card. I would drop something. I would drop a couple of samples and say, hey, Michael, I see that, I've analyzed this. I prepared a small report, 2-page report of where I think we can add value. And I'll come back when you have time. So just wanted to drop in and say hello. How do you think is the best way that suppliers initially, the first call, they just quickly come and go back, right? And then second time they come back saying, hey, I was there last Monday. Do you have time now? Did you get a chance to look at my material?
So I know it's not very an easy job. So I'm trying to be like kind as possible, even when I have a bad day or hard beginning of service. So I'm just like, if they understand I don't have time and they're not coming like on the middle of the service or middle of the rush, yeah, sure, no problem. I'm just taking the business cards, I give mine. And if there are any questions, they can like reach me later. It's always good to have like the first contact face to face, I should say. So you know who you're talking to. So it's always like the good way to get like the first contact with the person. I think it's really good like that.
And in the first contact, you don't want them to ask you, hey, do you have time to taste? Or it's okay if they ask you, hey, and pull their wines off their bag?
I mean, it's okay. I mean, it's better if they have, but usually I don't have time, just especially in last minute. And I prefer to be ready and just like to know what's going on before trying something random or something I don't really need. So I think it's better just like to come another time for a proper tasting.
Okay.
And even for both of us, we're not losing time because maybe you have something in your bag is not for my restaurant or it's not for me or it's not for the retail. So I think it's better to set up exactly what I need for both of us.
I would say it depends on who's doing the cold calling, but if you could also think about like if you set some appointments up, if you get some contacts with people, and there's two things: the thing that you really want to sell and show them, but you're not going to tell them, and then you can kind of lead in with something they need or they need to try. So if you already have a relationship with these people, you can kind of, if you have an appointment, you can go in tasting or showing a product, but this is not the product I actually want to sell. While I'm here showing this product, I'm actually going to slip in these other products. Does that make sense? Often the things that I find buying that I didn't know I was going to buy are the things that just happen to kind of come along with the ride. So those other things that you slipped out of the bag in that tasting appointment, I didn't know I needed those until some event came up or something, so then I needed this wine. But because you showed them to me in that appointment and I didn't request those items, that's smart. That's a smart tactic for, a wine rep, for example. But those people already have kind of the contacts to the restaurant and they already have the ins and outs. But that's just another side to get something shown as well.
Great. I think I'll have questions by Ankita from the audience. So maybe Ankita, you can ask Dejah as well.
So we have 3 questions and none of the questions are being directed to any particular judge. So feel free to just jumping in the conversation, whosoever wants to answer. So the first question is, I'm a wine exporter from Europe to USA. We represent a kosher, organic, high quality and moderately priced European wine producer. Who would you suggest we approach for import and distribution in the US? And how would you do it? Basically, they're just looking for any importer and distribution. And there's one more part of this question is, what would be the primary USP for the US market? Is it going to be kosher or organic?
Those are 2 completely different categories.
Yeah.
I would, if I were you, I would hit up the big boys like Southern RNDC, Breakthrough, but they also have, they have dozens of kosher wines already on their list. Those wines are going to go towards specific accounts, and it is a niche product. So it's a product that is requested rather than you're not going around kind of trying to sell those wines, if that makes sense. organic category is sprinkled through the whole world. I mean, that's nearly all. It's like most of our produce. I mean, that's a hard one.
All right. So the next question is, where does New Zealand wine sit in the US market, and what price points are preferred?
Yeah. So, look, New Zealand is one of the few categories that really continues to show solid growth. Obviously, a lot of the drive is coming through Sauvignon Blanc from Marlborough. There's been some significant ups and downs in terms of volume in recent vintages, but the demand in the U.S. for New Zealand wine is quite high. The price point is quite robust as well. So it's really one of the most healthy, or maybe the most healthy segment within the U.S. Market. I think with New Zealand, I think there's opportunities for areas outside of Marlborough. And certainly some of the outlying areas, if you're in Martinborough, Central Otago, or so on, the volumes are not going to be as high. But I think there's a good story there. And I don't think that story is really fully played out in the U.S. There's an over-reliance on Marlborough, over-reliance on Sauvignon Blanc, and which has been a recipe for success in recent years. But my thought would be really preparing for what's coming next and having something new and interesting to play. I've been tasting some wines from Hawke's Bay that I think are just incredible. Never going to be huge volume drivers, but they could help in terms of maintaining a solid lift for New Zealand for years to come. I don't know if that really answered the question. Oh, the price points for Sauvignon Blanc, there's a lot of variability there. There's a good number of private label Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand that's being dumped on the market now, which is never a good thing. I can see examples out on shelves for around $7 a bottle.
Wow.
But generally speaking, you're looking at double digits retail price, starting generally mid-teens, and in retail, in large retail, I'm talking more of the big box types of stores. I mean, heavy promotion, not only on New Zealand but across the whole store. There's always
I
this
think
risk.
standard is $14.99 for Sauvignon Blanc, and after sale $12.99, and Pinot Noir is going to be $2 more.
There's always this risk, when you're riding a wave and you've been very successful, which New Zealand has been. You don't want to fall into some category where you're starting to become a commodity. There's always a risk there. So that premium aspect of it, I think, is what New Zealand just needs to keep on pushing. And pushing that beyond Marlborough, I believe would have long-term
Do you think
benefits.
it can be pushed beyond $20 for Sauvignon Blanc Marlborough? Do you think consumers will think that someone's charging a fair price where the market leaders all are at $14.99?
At this point, I think in many cases that's a tough one. Look, there's subregions within Marlborough. Those subregions, that story is not well told. Mm-hmm. And in order to drive a higher price point, you're looking for more of a specific limited place of origin with a story that you can tell. That is very much an opportunity for New Zealand. That, aside from a very limited range of outlets, that story has not been conveyed well.
So there are two more questions, a quick question. So one is for Bordeaux wine. So are you seeing growth or decline in Bordeaux wines in the US market?
I sell a lot of Bordeaux, but Paul, you can talk.
Yeah, Bordeaux. So I don't want to do Bordeaux bashing because Bordeaux is a great wine region. So I think they decrease a little bit, but I think it's always like a good price point. Like even in the supermarkets, you can find like very good wine, white or red, for a good price. And also we have like also the main one like Lafite, Cheval, that's iconic, and I think they're gonna stay there forever. So I should say like the middle range, like the one between like 30 to 50, they decrease a little bit, but the rest I think it's like pretty constant. That's my opinion and my feeling about the market. I don't know, Michael, what you think about it.
Just in Bordeaux in late April, so just about, it seems like 2 months ago, and I am so excited. This is a great, I mean, you got to understand when we talk about categories and wines, Cabernet, the grape in general, is dominating the world. So Bordeaux is extremely established in the markets that we're in throughout the United States and the world. And also, Bordeaux is a very large region. It's of all of France, maybe 20% of all of the wine is coming from Bordeaux. So you got to understand, they're making mostly everyday drinking wine for the country of France and elsewhere. So there's a lot of cheap Bordeaux. And then you go in, and you get the highest quality wines in the world. So it's exciting to show people affordable Bordeaux at a good quality. There's a market for that. And I sell classified growth Bordeaux every week. But visiting Bordeaux, it excites a sommelier like myself, because you go to Cheval Blanc and they're biodynamic. I visited so many producers and they've been organic for so long. The farming, you think they're just thinking about farming now. They've been thinking about this stuff for 20 plus years and practicing. So, but these are probably the people who have the money as well and the property to do it. And also when you go organic, it's not just, it's on your own. If your neighbor is doing some serious pesticides, it actually could restrict your opportunity to be organic. And the conversations are constantly growing with consumers. It is key for all of us, and I think everyone on the line understands how to talk about products that are practicing and are responsible, meaning these wines come from organic, right? But you have to understand there's there's different ways to label things. There's international, there's regional. So, like United States, France, Italy, and then even within regionally and greater than that have their own certifications. And those often take several years to obtain. So yeah, there's plenty of organic producers that have the word organic on their label. Chateau Coutet, for example, in Saint-Emilion, Grand Cru, is an amazing producer that has been organic for hundreds of years.
Cool. Thanks. So one last one, Ankita, from the attendees.
Yes. Any needs for Portuguese stable wines, red from Alentejo or white red from Dow, for example?
I go to Portugal on a regular basis, and they're once a year, twice a year. I think this is one of the more fascinating wine regions of the world. You have a massive indigenous grape varieties. The wines, I think the quality for the money is sensational. I see the future for Portugal as just being all blue sky and sunshine. It's a good story there. I think if you look at the various regions there, there's areas that may be a little bit more obscure. But what seems to be the driver is oftentimes the price point. It's just the connection of Portugal and a price point. To me, it's a great story for that country. And I think it's, when you look at what's happening in Douro and, some of the more upscale wines that are being produced there, I think that's really a good message. So you don't want to fall into this spot of always being sort of like the cheap and cheerful wine. You need to have some premium, you need to have some vertical stretch and price points. But look, I think the future for Portugal is outstanding. And the other thing that really plays to its benefit too is, there's parts of the country that have a good presence of Portuguese restaurants. That's always going to be a good segue to build your business. So I'm a big fan.